So to end this video on a bright note, I think we can expect great things to come in the future of Eurovision Song Contest. That didn't age well, did it? Yeah, this year was not fun. And I'm not just saying that because I'm Norwegian and we came last for the 12th time. No, this year has been filled with scandals, with controversy, politics, and it's just been miserable for everyone involved. It went from being one of the most exciting editions ever, with a wide variety of songs, moods, styles, and languages, to just becoming this uproar of endless rage and disappointment that frankly threatened the existence of the entire contest. In the days following the event, it almost felt like a bad fever dream, and it's insane to think that an event that is usually so beautiful and engaging can turn so ugly that even the fans just want it to be over. And there are so many layers to this that I'm not even sure where to start. In this video, I want to take a deep dive into this year's multiple controversies, to try and figure out where things went wrong, why we saw the reactions that we did, and how we can prevent this from happening in the future. Because we don't want to see a part 2 of this, do we? It almost goes without saying that this is gonna be like the longest thing I've ever made, so if you don't feel like sitting through this whole thing, feel free to navigate through the chapters on the video timeline. Otherwise, get yourself a cup of tea and a big bowl of popcorn because we're gonna be here for a while. Let's start from the beginning. So this all started back in December, when it was revealed that Israel would take part in the Eurovision Song Contest of 2024. Many were taken aback by this, and the news were not received with glee, as they are in the middle of a big political conflict in the Middle East. Many Europeans are critical of how the conflict has evolved, to the degree that Israel as a country has grown quite controversial. And so Eurofans were worried that Israel's participation under these circumstances would bring a great political discord into the event. But the EBU's reasoning for including Israel was quite the contrary. This is a non-political event between broadcasters and not governments, and so they had no reason to deny Israel their right to participate. To exclude Israel would serve as a political act, something in which would go against the spirit of the contest. In other words, Israel is there to avoid politics affecting the contest. Some of the reactions that we've seen is due to the situation we had 2 years ago in 2022, when Russia was banned from the contest because of their invasion of Ukraine. The statement back then included the following phrase: "In light of the unprecedented crisis in Ukraine, the inclusion of a Russian entry in this year's contest would bring the competition into disrepute." Many perceived it as a double standard from the EBU when the same logic was not applied to Israel. But there are two things that should be said about this that may explain why Israel did not meet the same fate as Russia. The first is that the conflict in the Middle East is far more complicated and long-term, which makes it harder for the EBU to single out Israel as the bad guy, especially if they don't want to get on anyone's bad side. Secondly, one could argue that they did try to keep them out of the contest by rejecting their song. Eden Golan's song originally had very clear references to the ongoing conflict and had to be changed twice before getting accepted as an entry. However, the EBU really did shoot themselves in the foot when they said that Russia was excluded in fear of disrepute. Because really, it's mind-boggling how they thought it would be a good idea to include Israel when they knew the kind of chaos it would unleash. And this has led to the online discussion of a possible third factor, which is money. You see, for the past 4 years, the Eurovision Song Contest has been sponsored by Moroccan Oil, which is an Israeli company. And it's not impossible that this has affected the EBU and their decision-making. After all, banning Israel from participating might cost them their sponsorship, and that may not be a risk that they're willing to take. So anyway, Israel was allowed to participate. But how did this affect the contest? Well, for starters, the security had to be set to an extreme level because it posed a great threat to the contest and the city of Malmö. Armed police forces were called in from Denmark and Norway to help cover ground, sharpshooters were placed on the roof of the Malmö arena, and a strict policy was enforced on everyone present. In fact, a policy so strict that the EBU started coming off as somewhat of a fascist regime themselves. Any flag, item, symbol, or phrase that could be associated with politics was strictly disallowed, to the degree that only a handful of items could go through the security check without being confiscated. The artists were placed in a rather awkward position, where an entire world was watching them through the lens of politics, while also being denied the right to speak freely about the matter. Every attempt to express oneself would be silenced, like for example when the EBU refused to upload Erik Sade's interval performance because he had a Palestinian scarf wrapped around his wrist, even though Erik Sade is half Palestinian and that was his father's scarf. And there's a lot that can be said about making political statements in Eurovision. But while the EBU was busy trying to censor the politics only grew more and more visible. The artists, now being the faces of the Eurovision brand, had to carry the entire political burden on their shoulders, where everything they did or didn't do could be twisted and turned into a political agenda. Tension was murderous both inside and outside the Malmö arena, and it all came down to one person, the Israeli artist Eden Golan. Eden spent most of her time locked up in their hotel room for her own personal safety, as there was a great risk that she would be attacked by the protesters. When traveling between the hotel and the arena, she had to be escorted in a long convoy of bulletproof vehicles, accompanied by no less than 100 police officers and helicopters. Whenever she'd arrive at the arena, there would be tens of thousands of people protesting her presence, and none of the other artists wanted to associate with her. And whenever she stood on that stage to perform her song, the entire arena would erupt into a seemingly endless chore of boos. Some have argued that the protesters are the ones acting out, causing security risks and creating a toxic atmosphere. And it's true, we're all responsible for our own actions. But the thing is, people are unpredictable and you can't expect them to behave and react the way you want. If tens and thousands of people decide to protest in the streets, you can't stop them, and when an entire arena starts booing, you can't silence them. I mean, the EBU tried, but it didn't work. The anti-booing technology made the crowd boo even louder, and it did nothing to take away the boos for Eden Golan. But more on that later. This really does make me wonder why Israel would even want to be there. I mean, let's just look at the Israeli perspective. It's not fun seeing tens of thousands of people protesting against your country outside the arena. It's not fun watching your representative be locked in her hotel room 24/7 for her own personal safety, only for her to be booed on and off stage several times a week. And it's not fun watching an entire continent grow to resent you more and more over the course of the contest. So what exactly is the motivation for joining an event like this when you know the kind of response you're gonna get? I suppose one could argue that Israel withdrawing would mean facing defeat or admitting fault, and that they wouldn't want to do that. But the thing is, that doesn't have to be the case. A withdrawal might as well be them standing up for themselves and say, we do not tolerate being treated this way, or we are concerned for the safety of our representatives. The option to withdraw was definitely there, and I think a lot of chaos and division would be avoided for everyone, including themselves, if only the Israeli broadcaster had read the room and decided to sit this one out. Because of the uproar surrounding Israel's participation, many lived under the false belief that the problem would solve itself. Barely anyone would want to vote for Israel under these circumstances, and so surely they wouldn't get a good result. And with that in mind, people found it within themselves to filter out the negativity and simply enjoy the show. But then came the moment when we all had to face reality. Israel qualifying for the grand final, although controversial, was not fully unexpected. The real shock came afterwards when the Italian broadcaster Rai leaked their televote results live on television. The results showed that nearly 40% of Italians had given their vote to Israel, granting them over 5 times as much support as anyone else. And this came as a shock to many, because how did they manage to scrape together so many votes when everyone seemed to be against them? Well, let me explain how. When it was first announced that Israel would take part in the contest, a lot of people initiated a mass boycott of the contests in protest against this decision, either by refusing to watch or refusing to vote. That is a heck lot of votes that could have gone to someone other than Israel. Meanwhile, the people who support Israel would not only watch the show, but pour all their votes into one single entry, possibly even on multiple phones if they can, to ensure that they're giving their favorite all the support that they possibly can. A lot of people would also vote for Israel out of sympathy for Eden Golan or out of spite to see what will happen if they win. The Barbra Streisand effect is really strong here. The harder you try to censor something, the more attention it will get. So paradoxically, the boycott and protest against Israel has actually helped Israel do better in the contest. Anyhow, the response to the Italian televotes was pure panic, because suddenly Israel had a very realistic chance of winning the whole contest. And some may wonder, and I've heard many people ask this too, what is the big deal? It's just a song contest, right? But the problem does not lie with the public disagreeing with the winner or what song we want to see it come out on top. The problem is the chain reaction that this would trigger. With tens and thousands of protesters already fired up by Israel's presence, an Israeli win would unleash a violent riot and a possible storming of the arena. It could end in tragedy. And that's only the protesters who are physically there. The competition would be condemned by a massive online mob, artists, broadcasters, and experts all over the world, making it lose all the integrity it had left because of a political result. And even if it were to survive the backlash, how many would be willing to join the contest in Israel in 2025? The Eurovision Song Contest cannot survive if nobody is willing to join or watch, so there is a very realistic chance that this could be the end of it. I do wonder if the EBU had even thought of this scenario. Well, the community had thought about it, and now that it was clear that an Israeli win was possible, everything stopped being about the music and instead became about preventing an Israeli win, all for the sake of damage reduction. To make this happen, many Eurofans mobilized for a mass vote, mostly aimed towards Croatia's Baby Lasagna, who was the odds favorite. Other candidates included Switzerland's Nemo, who was predicted to do better with the jury, and Ireland's Bambi Thug, who was the most vocal critic of Israel. But any artists that were considered unfit to beat Israel became irrelevant and were suddenly drowning away in the name of politics. Slowly but surely, people were beginning to lose interest in the political circus that this had become, as the entire contest had suddenly been turned on its head, stripped of its meaning. But even so, nothing could prepare us for what was to come next. On Friday, May 10th, the day before the final, came the news that the Netherlands' Joost Klein, who was among the public favorites this year, had been denied to perform in the dress rehearsal because of an incident with a female staff member. Rumors spread like wildfire online, speculating on what he could have possibly done, and after several hours without any official statements, the most horrendous claims were passed off as facts by official media and news outlets. Claims that can ruin lives. The EBU did nothing to change the narrative, allowing the public to trust the belief that he was a violent madman who physically assaulted a woman on the set. Barely a word had been said from their side when, the next day, only hours before the grand final, they announced that the Netherlands had been disqualified because of the ongoing investigation. And this was it. This was the final straw. The Dutch delegation was furious with the EBU, refusing to hand out their points in the final that evening.
Fuck the EBU.
Alessandra and Karja also withdrew as spokespeople for their countries, several artists skipped the flag parade, Francis Slimane held a speech in the middle of his song, and Ireland's Bambi Thug took it upon themselves to personally confront the EBU. A chain reaction of rage had been triggered, and the protests intensified to such a degree that we saw scenes like these unfold on live television.
The Eurovision Executive Supervisor Martin Österdahl, what can you tell us about the result?
Yeah, good evening. So the moment of truth has arrived. And I can tell you that we've checked and verified all of the results, and we're ready to start revealing the results of the grand final result. So with that, Malin and Petra, you're good to go.
Now, for the result from the Netherlands, I turn to Martin Österdahl.
Yes, hi, we have no spokesperson contact with the Netherlands tonight, but the 12 points from the Dutch jury goes to Switzerland.
Switzerland, 12 points.
It's clear that the public had now turned on the EBU. But why did the Joost Klein incident become the breaking point? How did everyone, Joost fan or not, seem to automatically side with him without knowing the full story of what happened? Well, there are a number of reasons. And the list just keeps getting longer. Firstly, there is the feeling of injustice. Many have pointed out how if what Joost did was really that serious, and the EBU really did not feel safe allowing him to perform on stage. A better solution would be to play his performance from semi-final 2, just like what they did in the jury show. This would serve as a strict punishment against Joost, who would not be allowed to perform, while still respecting the work and money put in by the Dutch delegation and the fans who had voted for him Thursday evening. But honestly, given the circumstances and everything we know, even a penalty like that sounds questionable at best. While the details in the story are still unclear to many, the head of the Dutch delegation and Joost's lawyer, Jan-Åge Velt, has clarified to the press that Joost never even touched the woman. The incident that had occurred was merely him pushing away the camera because the woman was recording him against his will. Prior to this, they had an agreement that Joost was not to be filmed when getting off stage, because the end of his performance is very emotional to him. So to summarize the incident, Joost got off stage in an already emotional state, got filmed against his will, and got fired up when she refused to stop. He then pushed away the camera, something in which made the woman feel threatened, but the woman was never physically touched or harmed in any way. Now, it's very possible that Joost came off as overly aggressive in the situation and should have handled his emotions better. And if that was the case, that should indeed be made very clear to him and the Dutch delegation. However, we also know that the photographer violated the agreement to not film Joost in this very moment and did not respect his request to stop filming. Did anyone stop to consider her wrongdoings in all of this and how that might have affected his reaction? And then we have the EBU. They emphasized in their statement how they had a zero-tolerance policy to ensure a safe work environment for everyone in the production. But the consideration for the artist's work environment, on the other hand, has been completely non-existent. Throughout this season, the artists have been under a continuous and immense amount of stress, faced harassment, and several delegations have talked about how it's been impossible to get through to the EBU about their complaints and safety concerns.
EBU is not what the Eurovision is. Fuck the EBU. I don't even care anymore. Fuck them.
In fact, before the incident with Joost Klein took place, the Dutch delegation had filed 2 official complaints to the EBU about an unsafe environment on set. That really should say something. Honestly, with the artists' concerns being continuously neglected by the EBU, it was only a matter of time until someone would lose their cool. That someone happened to be Joost Klein, but the EBU will take no self-criticism on the matter. From the way I see it, Joost Klein, the photographer, and the EBU are all equally responsible for the incident taking place. And the penalty towards Joost Klein and the Dutch delegation as a whole is not only one-sided, but also an extreme overreaction that affects so many more than Joost himself. Meanwhile, several complaints have been filed about the Israeli delegation and press harassing others, some in which are documented by video footage and backed up by witnesses. But the EBU does nothing about it. The Spanish broadcaster RTVE had to take to social media to condemn the behavior of the Israeli press, and when Bambitha confronted the EBU about the Israeli delegation, they confirmed that there had been a breach of the policy. But despite this, no consequences were faced or mentioned. The injustice feels incomprehensible when they allow such behavior by the Israeli delegation and press. But as soon as Joost Klein pushes a camera out of his face, he is disqualified and reported to the police. You know, there's a painful symbolism here with how the slogan of this contest is united by music, and they chose to disqualify the one song that celebrates European unity.
Do you think that your song can unite us all by music?
I think that's a good question for the EBU.
But there is more to be said about the EBU's handling of the situation. Many have reacted to how they kept specifying that it was a female staff member, as if that had any relevance whatsoever. If anything, this piece of information fed into the rumors of Joost being a woman beater, but they made no effort whatsoever to clear his name or calm the situation. They allowed Joost Klein's name to be dragged through the mud and become subject to a harmful and potentially life-altering conspiracies. In the community, there was a collective agreement that the EBU's moral compass was way off course, as they had created a distorted image of what happened and what kind of person he was. Every person has the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, but the EBU has done it the other way around, prejudging Joost, penalizing him with disqualification and trying to erase him from the event. It's no wonder why this became the breaking point of the contest, and the backlash that followed has been fully deserved. It is all the result of the EBU's poor decision-making, situation handling, double standards, shifting of blame and disregardment of responsibility over the course of this entire season. Joost Klein might have done something he was not supposed to, but Europe stands united in the belief that he did not deserve such a strict punishment. And with that, Joost Klein and his Europapa became the anthem of protest against the EBU. There's not really much to be said about the actual show, but another topic that have been prone to a lot of discussion is the use of anti-booing technology. This was mainly used during Eden Golan's performance, where they turned off the mics in the audience and applied fake applause to cover up the massive booing. And I do understand the reason why they did this. The booing would have created negative publicity for Eden Golan, affecting how people view the song and broken the illusion of a friendly and uniting contest. But, like I mentioned earlier, the silencing of the crowd and the fake applause only made the crowd boo even louder, and in turn making the experience even worse for Eden Golan. In fact, the booing was so loud that despite the anti-booing technology, it could still be heard on TV. Some may argue that the critique of the anti-booing technology stems from people wanting to hear the crowd boo for Eden Golan, and for some people that could be the case. But on a more general note, there is the fear of how anti-booing technology distorts reality. Because the beauty with music is how it makes us feel, and the fake applause is not the genuine reaction of the crowd. Let's forget Israel for a moment. If fake applause was applied for every entry and with every announcement throughout the show, we would never know what the genuine feelings in the crowd were. The connection between the artist and the crowd would be non-existent, the response would be robotic and unauthentic, and frankly, the crowd might as well not be there. No more collective singing to the bops of the year, no more genuine reaction to the things that happen, no more interaction with the audience, and no more projection of the mood in the arena. The TV watchers would go from feeling like part of the show to might as well be watching a music video. And that's why people are now asking, is this the direction that we want to go in? And while we're at it, the pre-recorded backing vocals are also becoming a topic for discussion, because a lot of the time we can barely even hear the person singing. The pre-recorded backing vocals were first permitted as a way to reduce the amount of people on stage during the pandemic. But people are now beginning to ask why we still have them. Because just like with the anti-booing, this makes the performance feel less authentic, and it kind of takes you out of it. After all, this is supposed to be a live performance, but it doesn't always feel like it. The instrumentals are already pre-recorded, something in which became unavoidable with the introduction of digital music, but we see it more and more now how the pre-recorded backing vocals are excessively used to cover up bad singing. And by all means, the ones who do this rarely ever do well in the contest, but this is not about who wins or not, but the whole experience that it gives us as an audience. We have reached a point where we are about to lose the beauty of live music at the hands of anti-booing, fake applause, and pre-recorded vocals. And once again, people ask, is this really what we want? When it all came down to it at the end of the day, Switzerland and Nemo won the trophy. And I think just about everyone sighed in relief, knowing that the next contest would not take place in Israel. But that doesn't mean that the result was without controversy. I mean, is it ever? And once again, just like every year, this is all about the jury. Because first of all, we saw a situation similar to Loreen last year, where Switzerland and Nemo had such a huge point lead by the jury that it stalled the chances of everyone else. Although I myself feel pleased with Switzerland being the winning entry, I understand the frustration that many feel for Croatia. After all, I want to remind you that Nemo only came 5th in the televote. And I think this fact kind of drowned away in the chaos, both because the main focus was aimed towards Israel and whether or not they would win, and because a lot of people lost interest halfway through the contest. A lot of the top entries were subject to political voting anyway, so this was all just a big mess. But even so, we are facing the same problem as we did last year, the jury securing the victory of one entry. Nemo and Switzerland received 365 points from the jury, granting them a point lead of 147. This made it unrealistic for anyone to catch up, even despite not scoring as high with the televoters. In fact, Croatia's Baby Lasagna said that he knew he had lost when he saw the jury score. And this really shouldn't be the case. Because if the jury has already made one entry impossible to beat, what's the point of voting for your favorite? And on a similar note, despite the EBU wanting the inclusion of Israel to be non-political, there was a very obvious political bias in the jury vote. This is not surprising at all, and I don't know what the EBU was expecting. Because unlike the televoters, the jurors will have their names publicized next to the points given. How many would dare put their names next to Israel in a positive or negative way when they know how controversial it is? After all, this could cost them their career, reputation, and possibly even personal safety, and that's not something many would be willing to risk, not for some silly song contest. And this is definitely something that the EBU should have seen coming, because no matter how hard they try to keep the politics out of this contest, they can't control the uncontrollable. In addition, it's still apparent that the jury points don't necessarily reflect quality, like for instance, Georgia and Norway being near the bottom of the jury scoreboard. Meanwhile, generic pop songs like Germany and Luxembourg rank much higher, something that many fail to see a logical reason for. I do think that the jury has been much better this year than last, but if we're gonna have a professional jury that determines 50% of the result, it has to be as accurate as possible when it comes to quality. Norway not being rewarded for such a difficult song with layers of traditional elements, and Georgia for her outstanding performance, really doesn't make sense from a professional standpoint. Looking forward, there are a lot of questions that need to be addressed. The EBU has a lot to answer for after everything that happened this year, and they need to take action to ensure that there is a future for Eurovision. First and foremost, we need to set the record straight and answer the big throbbing question: is Eurovision political or not? And the answer to this is very simple. Yes. Yes, it is. When you associate each participant with a flag and a country, it automatically becomes political. Doesn't matter how much you try to remove the politics from the equation, when you represent a country, you represent everything they stand for culturally and politically. In fact, the event wouldn't even exist without politics, as it was created in response to World War II. It's never been unpolitical, and if they wanted this contest to be between broadcasters and not governments, they should have used the logos and names of the broadcasters. I mean, that certainly would make the audience view the songs as songs and not countries. Now, don't get me wrong, the competitiveness between countries and the showcase of different cultures is exactly what makes it so exciting, beautiful, and uniting, and I wouldn't want them to change that to representing the broadcasters only. But my point is, they have to stop claiming that Eurovision is an event that is somehow immune to politics, because it's not, never has been, and never will be. To deny that fact is irresponsible, and that's exactly what we saw the result of this year. And let me remind you, it could have ended so much worse. Avoiding political responsibility is the safest way to make it spiral out of control. The goal should not be to avoid politics, but to make it as politically neutral as it can possibly be. Because let's face it, we're a diverse continent. We have different laws, different cultures. We're never going to agree on everything, and under normal circumstances, that's not an issue. We can think differently and still get along. But when our differences start overshadowing the very heart of the event, that's when we have a problem. A start would be to ban countries that are in an active war. And yes, that would include both Israel and Ukraine. I have to admit, I was among the people who cheered for Ukraine when they won back in 2022, because all of Europe uniting behind Ukraine felt like such a beautiful reflection of Eurovision's core values: peace and unity. To say that Ukraine's win was unpolitical would be a lie, and frankly, looking back, I regret my stance. The event was very uninteresting that year, no other contestants stood a chance, and even though most Europeans had a shared opinion that war, that's rarely ever the case. And besides, the result should not be decided by things that are irrelevant to the song, no matter if that's sympathy or hate. The war in Ukraine has followed them to the Eurovision stage for the past 3 years, and I've loved Ukraine's entry both this year and in 2022. But I think it's time for them to step back and focus on other things. When the time's right, they will be welcomed back with open arms. On a non-political note, there needs to be some serious change within the EBU, because most of the chaos this year was due to the EBU's poor decision-making and an outrageous degree of unprofessionalism. This is not something that will be easily forgotten and forgiven by the community or the national delegations. In fact, it's not unlikely that there will be a mass withdrawal for the 2025 season, so the EBU really is in no position to remain idle. Several people will need to be replaced, including Martin Österdahl, who I cannot imagine will recover his reputation after this disaster. And they need a serious change in policy that ensures professionalism, fairness, and respect for all. Enough with this overly capitalistic vibe that has consumed the contest since COVID. I get that this is an expensive event, but it seems more and more like the sponsors are the ones pulling the strings at the EBU, and I really don't like how they promote and commercialize themselves during the show. This is a non-profit event, already financed by our tax money and several rounds of voting. We don't need them shoving it in our faces to download their apps, follow them on social media, tune in for the next semifinal, or make sure to watch Junior Eurovision. I feel like the EBU has lost track of what this contest is about, and they need a serious revamp to retrieve it. I also have to repeat some of my suggestions from last year. The jury need to be increased and diversified, and they should rethink the system overall. Because while we definitely need a jury to reward musical quality, this should not be the defining factor. So once again, I would like to propose a jury boost system, where instead of receiving jury points, each contestant have their televote scores boosted according to how well they rank with the jury. With a system like that, this year's results would look like this. Alternatively, a simple solution would be to implement a point cap for the jury, either by setting an upper cap at, say, 300 jury points, or to set the maximum point lead to, say, 100 points. Possibly even both of these. This would allow the jury to head start good quality entries, while still leaving enough playroom for the televoters to affect the final result. With both of these caps in place, Finland would have beaten Sweden by 6 points last year, and this year, Croatia would have beaten Switzerland by 21 points. That sure would make things interesting. And lastly, please, no more anti-booing technology, no more fake applause, and no more pre-recorded backing vocals. It made sense during COVID when we needed to restrict the amount of people on stage, but we're done with that now, so please, let's take back the live show experience. This year was meant to be the most memorable in terms of music, with so many unique styles, genres, beats, and expressions. This year's songs were sung in 16 different languages, and so many chose to send something that was authentic and personal to both the artist and the country. There was no clear winner or favorite, and so musically, the hype was real. But that's not how it went. With tens and thousands of protesters outside the arena, contestants at the forefront of a political crisis, a long list of controversies, and several unpopular decisions by the EBU, it felt as though the Eurovision Song Contest was falling apart for good. It's clear that things cannot continue the same way as before, because if they do, the same things will happen over and over and over until there's no more Eurovision. And that day can come sooner than we think. We need to stop denying the existence of politics. Politics have always been part of Eurovision, and it's about time that gets established. But this is Eurovision, not the Hunger Games. This is a place where everyone is supposed to feel safe, free, and united, despite our differences, because that's what the power of music is. This is not the place for ignorance, injustice, and world conflicts. But somehow, those 3 words became the theme this year. And the blame lies with the EBU. The current sitting has proven unequipped to deal with the tension and make rational decisions, and as a result, all the trust and respect anyone had for them has vanished entirely. It's clear as day that they must now face the consequences of their actions, and lack thereof, and step away from their positions in the EBU. Or as Martin would put it, you're good to go. As much as I would like to end this video on a positive note, there isn't much positive to say after this disaster. So how about this? A crisis was averted, a winner was crowned, and to top it all off, the trophy broke, symbolizing the end of an awful season.